a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Whitey Bulger. James Joseph Whitey Bulger Jr. is an Irish-American former organized crime boss of the Winter Hill Gang in Boston, Massachusetts. Federal prosecutors indicted Bulger for 19 murders based on grand jury testimony from Kevin Weeks and other former associates. Bulger is the brother of William M. Bulger, former president of the Massachusetts Senate. According to the FBI, Bulger served as a confidential informant for the Bureau beginning in 1975, a claim Bulger denies. However, as a result, the FBI largely ignored his organization in exchange for information about the inner workings of the rival Italian-American Patriarca crime family. Beginning in 1997, the New England media exposed criminal actions by federal, state, and local law enforcement officials tied to Bulger. For the FBI especially, this caused great embarrassment. Bulger fled Boston and went into hiding on December 23, 1994. After being tipped off by his former FBI handler, John Connolly, about a pending indictment under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. For 16 years, he remained at large. For 12 of those years, Bulger was second on the FBI 10 Most Wanted Fugitives list, behind Osama bin Laden. On June 22, 2011, Bulger was arrested outside an apartment in Santa Monica, California. Arrested with him was his longtime girlfriend Catherine Grieg. Bulger was 81 years old at the time. Soon after, Bulger and Grieg were extradited to Massachusetts and taken under heavy guard to John Joseph Moakley United States Courthouse on Boston Harbor, which had to be partially closed for their arrival. Grieg pleaded guilty to conspiracy to harbor a fugitive, identity fraud, and conspiracy to commit identity fraud, and was sentenced to 8 years in prison in June 2012. Bulger did not seek bail and remained in custody at the Plymouth County House of Correction in Plymouth, Massachusetts. On June 12, 2013, Bulger went on trial for 32 counts of racketeering, money laundering, extortion, and weapons charges, including complicity in 19 murders. On August 12, he was found guilty on 31 counts, including both racketeering charges, and was found to have been involved in 11 murders. On November 14, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences plus 5 years for his crimes by U.S. District Judge Denise Casper. Bulger is now inmate number 02182-748, currently incarcerated for life at the United States Penitentiary Coleman II in Sumterville, Florida. Early life. Bulger's father, James Joseph Bulger Sr., was from Harbor Grace, Newfoundland. After settling in Everett, Massachusetts, James Sr. married Jane Veronica Jean McCarthy, a first-generation Irish immigrant. Their first child, James Joseph Bulger Jr., was born in 1929. The elder Bulger worked as a union laborer and occasional longshoreman. He lost his arm in an industrial accident and the family was reduced to poverty. In May 1938, the Mary Ellen McCormack Housing Project was opened in the neighborhood of South Boston. The Bulger family moved in, and the children grew up there. The other Bulger children, William Michael and John P. Bulger, excelled at school. James Bulger Jr. became drawn into street life. Early in his criminal career, local police gave Bulger the nickname Whitey because of his blonde hair. Bulger hated the name. He preferred to be called Jim, Jimmy, or even Boots, given because of his habit of wearing cowboy boots, and his fondness for pulling a switchblade out of said boots. However, the nickname, Whitey, stuck. Early criminal career. Bulger developed a reputation as a thief and street fighter fiercely loyal to South Boston. This led to his meeting more experienced criminals and finding more lucrative opportunities. In 1943, 14-year-old Bulger was arrested and charged with larceny. By then he had joined a street gang known as the Shamrocks, and would eventually be arrested for assault, forgery and armed robbery. He was sentenced to a juvenile reformatory for these crimes. Shortly after his release in April 1948, Bulger joined the U.S. Air Force, where his character continued to show. After his basic training, he was stationed as an aircraft mechanic, first at the Smoky Hill Air Force Base in Salina, Kansas, then in Idaho. He spent time in the stockade for several assaults. He was later arrested by Air Force Police in 1950 for going absent without leave. Nevertheless, he received an honorable discharge in 1952 and returned to Massachusetts. Prison. In 1956, Bulger served his first term in federal prison when he was sentenced to time in Atlanta Penitentiary for armed robbery and truck hijacking. He later told mobster Kevin Weeks that while there, he was involved in the MK Ultra program, the goal of which was to research mind control drugs for the CIA. For 18 months, Bulger and 18 other inmates, all of whom had volunteered in return for reduced sentences, were given LSD and other drugs. Bulger later complained that they had been recruited by deception, and were told they were hoping to find a cure for schizophrenia. He described his experience as nightmarish, and said it took him to the depths of insanity. Bulger was transferred from Atlanta to Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, arriving on November 2, 1959, as prisoner Z1428. He became a close friend of fellow inmate Clarence Carnes, aka the Choctaw Kid. In November 1962, he was transferred to Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary and, in 1963, to Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Bulger's third petition for parole, in 1965, was granted after he had served 9 years in prison. He would not be arrested again, let alone spend a day in jail, for 46 years. Killeen Mullen War. After his release, Bulger worked as a janitor and construction worker before becoming a bookmaker and loan shark under Donald Killeen, the leader of the dominant mob, the Killeens, for over 20 years in South Boston. The Killeens were led by 3 brothers Donnie, Kenny, and Eddie, along with Billy O'Sullivan and Jack Curran. Their base was the Transit Cafe in Southie, which would later become Whitey's Triple Loss. In 1971, Killeen's younger brother Kenny allegedly shot Michael Dwyer, a member of the rival Mullen gang, in the arm, and bit off part of his nose during a brawl at the Transit Cafe. A gang war soon resulted, leading to a string of killings throughout Boston and the surrounding suburbs. The Killeens quickly found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered by the younger Mullens. It was during the Killeen-Mullen War that Bulger committed what Kevin Weeks describes as his first murder. According to Weeks, according to former Mullen boss Patrick "Nay" McGonigal was enraged by the murder of his twin brother. Certain that O'Sullivan was responsible, McGonigal ambushed and murdered Bulger's partner. The end of the war is usually described as having come about in the following manner. Bulger, realizing that he was on the losing side, secretly approached Howie Winter, the leader of the Winter Hill Gang, and allegedly claimed he could end the war by murdering the leaders of the Killeen Gang. Shortly thereafter, on May 13, 1972, Donald Killeen was gunned down outside his home in a suburb of Framingham. Nay disputes this claim, claiming that Killeen was murdered by Mullen Gang enforcers James Mantville and Tommy King, not Bulger. Also according to Nay, Bulger and the Killeens fled the city in the aftermath of their boss' murder, fearing that they would be next. Instead of murdering them, however, Nay arranged for the dispute to be mediated by Winter and Patriarca crime family caper regime Joseph Russo. In a sit-down at Chandler's nightclub in the South End, the Mullens were represented by Nay and King and the Killeens by Bulger. Following the sit-down, the two gangs joined forces, with Winter as overall boss. Nay's claim to have requested the sit-down is contradicted, however, by Winter. In an interview with Kevin Cullen, Winter recalled, "Whitey walked into Chandler's. I never knew him before that. He knew I was friendly with the Mullens gang. He asked if I would intercede. I said, 'Are you serious about this? I don't want to intercede if you're not going to abide by it.' He said he would." Nay stated, according to Nay, soon after, Donald Killeen's sole surviving brother, Kenneth Killeen, was jogging in the City Point neighborhood of Boston. Bulger's voice called him over to a car and said, "It's over. You're out of business, no more warnings." Kenneth would later testify at the trial of disgraced FBI agent John Connolly that Winter Hill enforcer Stephen Flemmi and John Martorano were in the car with Bulger. Winter Hill Gang. After the 1972 truce, Bulger and the Mullens were in control of South Boston's criminal underworld. FBI Special Agent Condon noted in his log in September 1973 that Bulger and Nay had been heavily shaking down the neighborhood's bookmakers and loan sharks. Over the years that followed, Bulger began to remove opposition by persuading Winter to sanction the killings of those who stepped out of line. In a 2004 interview, Winter recalled that the highly intelligent Bulger could teach the devil tricks. During this era, Bulger's victims included Mullen gang veterans McGonigal, King, and Spike O'Toole. According to Kevin Weeks, also according to Weeks, in 1979, Winter was arrested, along with many members of his inner circle, on charges of fixing horse races. Bulger and Flemmi were left out of the indictments. They stepped into the vacuum and took over the leadership of the gang. They transferred its headquarters to the Lancaster Street garage in Boston near the Boston Garden in the West End. FBI informant. In 1971, the FBI approached Bulger and attempted to recruit him as an informant as part of their effort against the Patriarca family. FBI Special Agent Dennis Condon was assigned to make the pitch. However, Condon failed to win Bulger's trust. 3 years later, Bulger partnered with Flemmi, an Italian-American mobster who had been an FBI informant since 1965, although it is a documented fact that Bulger soon followed Flemmi's example. Exactly how and why continues to be debated. Special Agent John Connolly frequently boasted to his fellow agents about how he had recruited Bulger at a late-night meeting at Wollaston Beach inside an FBI-issue car. Connolly allegedly said that the Bureau could help in Bulger's feud with Patriarca underboss Gennaro Angelo. After listening to the pitch, Bulger is said to have responded, "All right, if they want to play checkers, we'll play chess. Fuck 'em." Weeks considers it more likely that Flemmi had betrayed him to the FBI. He writes of his belief that Bulger was caught between a rock and a hard place: supply information to the FBI or return to prison. In 1997, shortly after the Boston Globe disclosed that Bulger and Flemmi had been informants, Weeks met with Connolly, who showed him a photocopy of Bulger's FBI informant file. In order to explain Bulger and Flemmi's status as informants, Connolly said, "The mafia was going against Jimmy and Stevie, so Jimmy and Stevie went against them." In a 2011 interview, Flemmi recalled, "Me and Whitey gave the feds shit, and they gave us gold." According to Weeks, FBI agent John Morris was put in charge of the organized crime squad at the Bureau's Boston field office in December 1977. Morris not only proved himself unable to rein in Connolly's protection of Bulger, but even began assisting him. By 1982, Morris was thoroughly compromised, having had Bulger buy plane tickets for his then-girlfriend Debbie Noseworthy to visit him in Georgia while he was being trained for drug investigations. Even after 1983, when he was transferred to head up the Boston FBI's drug task force, Morris remained an accomplice to Connolly and Bulger. In 1995, Bulger and Flemmi were indicted on racketeering charges along with two Boston mafiosi, Frank Salim and Bobby DeLuca. During the discovery phase, Salim and DeLuca were listening to a tape from a roving bug, which is normally authorized when the FBI has no advance knowledge of where criminal activity will take place. They overheard two of the agents who were listening in on the bug mention that they should have told one of their informants to give a list of questions to the other wise guys. When their lawyer, Tony Cardinale, learned about this, he realized that the FBI had lied about the basis for the bug in order to protect an informant. Suspecting that this was not the first time this had happened, Cardinale sought to force prosecutors to reveal the identities of any informants used in connection with the case. Federal Judge Mark L. Wolf granted Cardinale's motion on May 22, 1997. On June 3, Paul E. Coffey, the head of the Organized Crime and Racketeering section of the Justice Department, gave a sworn statement admitting that Bulger had been an FBI informant. Coffey stated that since Bulger was accused of leading a criminal enterprise while working as an informant and was also now a fugitive, he had forfeited any reasonable expectation that his identity would be protected. On September 5, 2006, Federal Judge Reginald C. Lindsay ruled that the mishandling of Bulger and Flemmi caused the 1984 murder of informant John McIntyre, awarding his family $3.1 million in damages. Lindsay stated the FBI failed to properly supervise Connolly and stuck its head in the sand regarding numerous allegations that Bulger and Flemmi were involved in drug trafficking, murder and other crimes for decades. Brought to you by WikiVidi documentaries. Would you like to know more?